Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Tar Heel Illustrated.com, or, of course, if you are watching on our fast-growing YouTube channel, that's Tar Heel Illustrated. I'm THI staff writer Jacob Turner, and joining me, as he always does, for another episode of the UNC Football Show, it's our very own publisher, Andrew Jones. And AJ, here for another episode, the ACC Championship edition of the UNC Football Show. I believe this is our 13th preview episode that we've done. I think we've done 15 total. So really rocking and rolling on these and looking forward to talking a little Carolina football. Obviously, the Tar Heels facing off number 10 Clemson in Bank of America Stadium this Saturday in Charlotte, North Carolina, 8 p.m. kickoff. That game will be televised on ABC. Tar Heels coming off a disappointing loss to the rival, and if you look at Clemson, right in the same boat as the Tigers, coming off a disappointing home loss to South Carolina. So fun show ahead. We're going to kind of talk about some of the game week storylines as we always do, and then we'll move on to the preview a little bit later on in the show. So AJ, we're recording this on Monday evening, a little bit different of a time because obviously you'll be in Indiana on Wednesday when we typically record this for Carolina's basketball matchup in the ACC Big Ten Challenge with Indiana. But you were at his press conference, Mac Brown's press conference today, Phil Longo, as well as Gene Chizik there. I thought it was an interesting press conference from Mac, and I thought there's a lot of interesting kind of things to talk about that we can talk about here. So what were your kind of overall takeaways from the post NC State, press conference, first time you guys have been able to sit down and talk to him for kind of a prolonged period of time since that loss?
If you would have told me in August, anytime before August 27th, when they opened the season, that Carolina was going to win the division and play Clemson in the ACC championship game, be 9-3, but the tenor around the championship game week press conference would be largely negative. I wouldn't have believed you, and I bet you there's nobody listening, watching that would have believed it.
I wouldn't have believed it either. No.
And I asked Mac a little bit about fans, and it was a really interesting exchange. I asked him about fans being kind of upset and the hurt. And you and I have talked before about, that the program is doing something right if fans have pain and anger and pain when they lose a game, as opposed to apathy, which has been the case for much of the time since I started covering this program. So he kind of, I don't listen to the fans or anything like that. He didn't really go there, but I think he understood where I was getting at. And that's what I want to talk about here, because we in the media hear it like overwhelmingly so. Like, I can't begin to tell you how many people have reached out to me in the last few days just wanting to blast the program on our board. And we don't, as long as people aren't making threats or anything like that, we kind of let everything go. And usually it's fairly respectful. But people fire Mac, Twitter, fire Mac. Oh, yeah. Mac needs to retire. It's over the hill. Chizik needs to go. They all think Longo sucks, even though the offense is 11th in the country. And even Drake was getting criticized. And I found that to be fascinating, because here we are right now on a Monday evening, and in five nights from now, they're going to play for a chance to win their first conference championship game since Lawrence Taylor was in uniform. Yet the fan base is not acting like it. This is only their second trip to the ACC title game. This is their second outright Coastal Division title. And Mac, who people are not happy with right now, in the last 3 years, you got an Orange Bowl, and you got an appearance in the ACC championship game, and you had a Heisman quarterback who'll be back next year and probably be the front runner for the Heisman voting in next year. And people are upset. So there's two ways to look at it. One, people are nuts. They have won 5 games before he got here, and look at where they are. People that say, oh, the game's passed them by. Who else could have built North Carolina into what the program has achieved in 2020 and this year from where it was? I don't know. If that person was here and they were younger, they would have gone to a bigger job, or people would be canonizing them and saying, we got to back up the Brinks truck to keep them. Mac has done that. Now, I know that there are warts. There are a lot of warts. We addressed that in the 3 things the other night. But it's fascinating that that's the tenor. And I think the other side of it is that there are a lot of warts. And I think that they know that. But he's not going to He's not going to be embarrassed about losing 2 in a row and going into the ACC title game. That's not the mood of the program. I actually saw Elijah Green on the elevator, and I chatted with him for a second. I said, big week for you guys. He said, oh, man, we are so excited. We got a chance to do something special.
Yeah.
So that's where they are. So, okay, whatever happened against Georgia Tech, whatever happened against NC State, you can't change it now. The 12 games are in the books. Now they have a chance to make amends for all of that in one night. 3.5 hours of football in Charlotte against the program in the league. They have a chance to change the narrative. And I think that that's really interesting because if I had time, maybe I'll hire someone to do it. Go back. If they win Saturday night, the people that are commenting on Twitter and all happy and stuff, I'd love to juxtapose that with their tweets on Friday.
God.
Or on our message board, which I would have time to actually go look at more than likely. I think it's a fascinating thing. A lot of us were asking negative questions. I asked about blitzing issues and someone else asked about not getting sacks. I asked Mac and Longo about what's wrong with the offense. I mean, these numbers don't lie. Their last 32 possessions, going back to the Wake Forest game, Jacob, they have 6 touchdowns. In their last 2 games, they're 9 for 34 and third down. In their last 2 games, they've been in the red zone 12 times. They have 4 touchdowns. They have taken a dramatic departure offensively from what they were. But they were trending a little bit that way, which we talked about a few weeks ago about how, you know what, they've only scored 40 plus twice since App State. Maybe they're not as prolific as people think. Yet here they are, the chance to play in a conference championship game. I think it's a fascinating dynamic. A program that hadn't won crap in a long time, and the fan base is pissed off because they lost 2 in a row, even though they're playing a conference title game. I think it's a fascinating thing. Mm-hmm. It's a real fascinating thing. And to Mac's credit, you know, he doesn't say negatives about the fans or anything like that. Maybe he's mildly amused. Maybe he really does not hear anything. I think it's amusing. More than that, I think it's fascinating. Yeah. I think it's fascinating to see how the fan base has reacted to all this. And I don't begrudge them being upset. I think they go a little too far, a little too emotional with some of the stuff. But then again, they're fans. That's what they do. I know I'm an emotional Orioles fan, so I want to fire people all the time there too. I want guys released all the time. I want pitchers released all the time. So I get it. It's just with this, I don't view it that way. So you and we're stuck kind of in the middle. Mm-hmm. You know, hearing what the program says and hearing what this tsunami of negativity from the fan base. It's a fascinating thing, Jacob.
Yeah, I think I look at it 2 ways. I think one, it's a testament to the job that Mac Brown's done since he got back here, because you've said it a lot. We talked about it in 3 things. The fact that people are upset speaks volumes to what he's been able to do in the success and the standard in a lot of ways that he's risen in just, you know, kind of 4 short years. When you look at how just bad and how bad of shape the program was under Larry Fedora in his last few years, where nobody was going to games. If Carolina lost, people didn't care, you know, especially that last season. It was just like, whatever, you know, it is what it is. We need to rebuild. We need to burn this whole thing to the ground and start over again. And I think I look at it in that respect, and also look at it in another way of terms of another thing we talked about at 3 things at length on the field after the loss to NC State is it's just Carolina football. It's a program that, and I'm saying this because I know a lot of Carolina fans. I've been going to Carolina games for a long time. I've been covering Carolina for a few years now. This is no disrespect to the current players and current staff, because this is something that's been going on for decades at Carolina. And I know this because I've talked to fans who've been going to games since the 80s, for instance, season ticket holders. And it's this feeling of, as soon as you think they're getting over the hump and you think they've kind of gotten there and they're doing so good, they come back down and, like you like to call them, have those kind of what the hell games, a loss to Georgia Tech and a loss to NC State in this sense. It's not that NC State is necessarily a what the hell game because of who the opponent is, but I think it was even worse because of when you look at what happened last season in Carter Finley, the way in which Carolina lost that game. And then you go over to a double overtime game in Kenan Stadium against an opponent that Carolina fans absolutely hate, and against it on the flip side, of NC State team and program and fan base that absolutely cannot stand North Carolina. So losing that game in that fashion after not showing up against Georgia Tech and losing in the way that they did in that game, I think it was kind of a perfect storm for there to be this kind of outrage around it going into the ACC championship game. But I do agree, AJ, it is kind of fascinating to see, because I remember coming in late in the Fedora era working with you, and to where it is now in the sentiment and just the attention and the care around the program. you really can't compare the two. So again, testament to what they've done. Yeah. But again, it's also just, it's kind of a Carolina football, I don't want to say curse, but it's a Carolina football thing that's just, for whatever reason, always kind of followed this football program around.
Culture has roots.
Mm-hmm.
Programs have roots. And sometimes people use that term, well, the roots of what we are. Like North Carolina basketball, the roots are rebounding.
Yeah.
To me, number one, okay? Sharing the ball, rebounding. That's what the current team is not doing is at the level it needs to. Carolina football, part of the roots is that it has the WTH moment, and it also has the you get in a really big game that could switch the narrative about the program, and bam. I mentioned 1980 when they won the ACC title. That team was 7-0, number 3 in the country, and they went to Oklahoma. It was 7-7 at the half, final score 41-7 Oklahoma. You think about Judgment Day, Max last year. Carolina's in position. If they win that game, they play for the national title.
Mm-hmm.
And Florida State comes in there, and Carolina, I don't know how many yards they got, but Davenport got hurt. Carolina could do anything offensively, 20-3 final. I could list a lot more, but I'm not going to bore people with that. They somewhat have that moment coming up because they could flip the narrative.
Mm-hmm.
They could flip the narrative about being able to win that big game, and it would gloss over Georgia Tech. It would make the sting of NC State a little bit better. Everyone was able to excuse Notre Dame. And even Kamari Morales a couple of weeks ago said, I don't want that game back. We were supposed to lose. We were supposed to lose and learn something from it. I asked Mac the Monday after Georgia Tech, how many bricks did you get out of that game who lost to Georgia Tech in your building process? And he said he got a lot. Well, as you and I talked about the other night, now they're putting my column after the game Friday night. Now they got to start adding some windows and some flooring and, hardwood floors and that kind of thing. They've got maybe enough bricks. So this weekend they have an opportunity to hang a beautiful chandelier and put in some French doors and have this beautiful bay window that just stands out and looks wonderful at Christmas time when there's a wreath on the front door and all that. They have that opportunity this weekend. And think about how everything would shift if they beat Clemson. And it's good that they're playing Clemson and not playing somebody else, because regardless of what Clemson is right now on the field compared to what it was a few years ago, you get a lot more value out of beating Clemson if they are to win than anybody else in the league. And I think that the weight that would carry moving forward would be enormous. Mm-hmm. So it looked bad against NC State a lot of the time. I think Georgia Tech was worse because they had no business losing that game. State's a good football team. Dave Doran's a good coach. I know the Carolina fans hate hearing that, and we're going to talk about him in a few minutes. But from a football perspective, I know they were playing a 4th-string quarterback, but NC State's a good football team. So that's going to happen. Now they have a chance to kind of push that stuff to the side and create a new narrative and a new tenor around the program, and have totally different questions in the press conference next week than there were today.
Good Lord, it'd be night and day compared to kind of what the mood has been. Just like I said, not even only today and last week, just over the last couple of weeks with how it's gone down and the highs.
And let me throw one more thing out too.
Yeah,
I'm just with the negativity of the negative tone of the questions more so than not. It is because they were 9-1 and then lost 2 in a row.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like they just kind of went back and forth, 1-3, lost 1, 1-3, lost 1, 1-3, lost 1. They were 9-1. They said that they would handle this well. So part of it's the not handling prosperity stuff, which is what the program still needs to do. So if they win Saturday, how do they respond in the bowl game? That's all part of how they're building this thing and dealing with the different hurdles and speed bumps that they have to navigate over as they continue to build this program up. So the negative questions were kind of made a lot of sense. Offense has gone south fast, and you lose to consecutive 3rd, 4th-string quarterbacks. That's bad. So that's why I think negative questions more for a 9-3 team in this situation than a lot of other 9-3 teams are getting right now.
Yeah, and again, they're fair questions to ask because I think they're questions that need to be asked. Building off of that, before we move on to the Clemson preview and to our sponsor on this podcast, I just want to ask you real quick. You mentioned the offensive struggles. You mentioned, things that Georgia Tech did to kind of stifle North Carolina offensively, really frustrate them in a lot of ways, and things that NC State did. Phil Longo said they were kind of opposites. There wasn't like similarities necessarily between the two. There were different kind of approaches defensively from an opponent perspective. So from what Phil said today with the struggles on the O-line, the struggles in the red zone, the struggles that have kind of followed this offense around, not only the last couple of games, but have kind of, like you said, kind of been following them like a shadow for a majority of this season to finally kind of caught up to them. And what I mean, caught up to them, I mean, resulted in them losing and really struggling to put up yardage and points, something they haven't really done this year in some ways. But, again, it's been masked over by them winning. So what did Phil Longo have to say about some of those issues over the last couple of weeks? Because it is a concern because you're going in to face a Clemson team that has one of the best defenses in the ACC. And if Carolina's not on their A game and they don't play well, they're going to lose the football game. So what did kind of Phil Longo have to say about that?
Well, it was a really interesting, I don't want to say conversation, discourse that some of us had with Phil. And you should watch the video if you haven't. It's on our site. It's on our YouTube channel. But Drake said Friday after the game, when he was asked what was the main, what's the first problem? And he said, well, NC State was dropping 8. And if we have 4 going out for a pass and they're dropping 8, well, you do the math. That's a direct quote from Drake. And they were getting a 3-man pass rush. So if you can get a 3-man pass rush, then you can drop 8 and feel pretty comfortable. If you're not consistently running the ball very well through the RPOs, they're not going to respect the run as much. So the RPO doesn't work the way it should. So I asked Phil today, is there a chess match element to what you could try to draw up to pull them out of the 8, dropping 8? And he said, yes, that they have to be patient with the decisions they make. And he thought that with the running back, with Drake, I think Drake didn't have great patience in this game. But really, it comes down to just winning your execution battles up front. Football's a real simple game. If you get 6 yards on a run, but the next 3 you're at 1, 0, or negative yardage, they're going to live with that, and they're going to stay with 8 dropped. And when they did get pressure, they blitzed, and they had a lot of success with it. So they're either blitzing linebackers or they're dropping 8. And Carolina just never had a chance to get into any kind of a groove. A lot of it was because State kept everything in front. They sort of squeezed the space for a lot of the routes for receivers finding grass. And the stuff that was wide that Drake was a little long on, they had 3 sensational catches that were out of bounds. Phil said they had dropped 8 all three of those times. And when they drop 8, the safeties play a little bit wider out. So it was a little more difficult for the receiver to get inside the DB when they needed to. And by the time they did, that was part of why those catches were out of bounds. If they hadn't dropped 8 and the safeties were tighter in, then maybe those balls are thrown and they catch them when they're still inbounds. So the dropping 8 is an issue, and they have to figure out a way to counter that. And without a consistent run game, and with a team that doesn't handle blitzes very well, that's a problem. And that's where it looked like people were saying Drake had terrible decision. Well, he was going through his progression, but it wasn't a usual progression because some of the routes couldn't be run. It was like a log jam, 15, 20 yards downfield. And that's why Carolina's scoring drives were in the 12, 13, I think one of them was 15 plays, because they had to take little bits when they could. But even that was difficult because the inability to run the ball had them in second and longs and then third and longs. Second and long, State blitzes, it's a third and long, and then they drop 8 back, and then you got to be fortunate to find someone that gets open. So they didn't execute against it. State did a really good job with it. And I suspect that you'll see Clemson do pretty much the same thing. And they're better up front than State. State's really good, but Clemson's better up front than State. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting
for Carolina this week.
I agree, because State, in some ways, based on that and based on the press conference Drake had, kind of given you the blueprint of what you need to do against North Carolina to struggle. And you just go watch a Georgia Tech game too and see what they did, because they did some different things than what State did, but it was still effective because Carolina really, really struggled, and he could never get into a rhythm in that game, particularly Drake May either. So yeah, last couple of weeks, definitely some causes for concern, and it'll be really interesting to see what kind of approach Clemson takes, but also on the flip side, what kind of approach does North Carolina take, and how can they counteract that and maybe find some success again? Because we have seen this offense been really good this year. There's no doubt about it. They can be that way. So AJ, real quickly before we move on to the preview, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor on this podcast. You guys know them. You guys know we love them. MyPerfectFranchise.net. So guys, if you're looking to diversify, looking to leave the corporate rat race, gain control of your income and schedule? Or what about having unlimited PTO and the ability to create income and wealth? Look no further than myperfectfranchise.net. Andy Ludicky, longtime Rivals member. He's the founder and owner of myperfectfranchise.net. He's a diehard college football fan, big Texas fan, and also because of that, a massive Mac Brown fan for what Mac Brown was able to do when he was at Texas. And most importantly, Andy's a long-time franchise veteran, having owned multiple franchises and businesses. So what he does, he uses his expertise to help others find their American dream through a very thorough and free consultation process. So guys, have you ever thought about opening a franchise? And there's so many of them. One thing I learned from the podcast that you guys, the 2 podcasts that you did with Andy a couple weeks ago, which will be linked in the description below, go check those out to learn a little bit more about what he does and who he is there's just so many different types of franchises. And you know there are, because you drive around all the time and you see all these different places that, you can find it in Durham, North Carolina. You could drive across the country and find it there too. There is, but you don't really realize until you hear kind of Andy spill it out for you. So if you guys have ever thought about opening a franchise, A, there's so many different opportunities and businesses you can open, but B, Andy was there to help you along the way. And guys, again, call Andy and you can put your life and career in your own hands with a 100% free consultation process. So guys, he won't even charge you for just talking to him and seeing if My Perfect Franchise is right for you. So check him out, myperfectfranchise.net. You can find your perfect franchise again at myperfectfranchise.net. Link is in the description below. If you do talk to him, make sure you talk a little Mac Brown and make sure you tell him that TarHeelIllustrated.com sent you. Massive shout out to Andy and myperfectfranchise.net. Again, all this stuff, including the link to those podcasts, is in the description below. AJ, let's talk a little Clemson, man. I think it's going to be a fun matchup. And I think in some ways, Carolina could be catching Clemson at a pretty decent time, because it is a team that, has lost some games over the last month or so. They're not really characteristically used to losing. So could be a good time to catch them. Sitting at number 10, 10-2, 8-0 in ACC play to finish the year. North Carolina dropping to number 24, 9-3, 6-2 in ACC play. So looking at the offense, AJ, this is a little bit less stats heavy than previous episodes, because I want to just kind of keep this one flowing. I think a lot of people know how good Clemson is. I don't need to sit here and spell it out for you, but I do think there's some concerns on the Clemson side as well that North Carolina will look to exploit. Offense ranks number 5 in the ACC in total offense, averaging a little over 406 yards per game. Number 3 in rushing offense, though, 188.3 yards per game. And interesting, this was a surprise to me. 4th to last in the ACC in passing offense, averaging just 218 yards per game. So not a team that's necessarily been dishing the ball out, but what Will Shipley's been able to do with that run back position has really helped him this year offensively. DJU, I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce his last name, played poorly against South Carolina, their last loss, previous game to South Carolina, throwing for just 99 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. So from Carolina, I'm definitely watching that game to look at the blueprint of how to frustrate him. And overall, he's been pretty average this season, only thrown for 200 or more yards in 1 of his last 5 games after actually starting the season pretty well. So a little bit of a drop off once again for DJU. And I think he's a guy that Clemson fans might not be too sure on when you look at what he did last year as well. Again, though, Will Shipley, over 1,000 yards rushing on the season. A lot of Carolina fans will remember him. They're pretty heavy after him. In-state kid for North Carolina. Clemson was able to steal. He's just been massive for them at the running back position. Real quickly, too, AJ, flipping over that defensive side of the ball, number 4 defense in the league, 326.7 yards per game. Not a great passing defense team, though. They ranked 9th in the ACC in passing yards allowed per game at 226.7. That is something Carolina may be looking to exploit, because they have been good through the air, not necessarily over the past couple games, but throughout the season. That's been one of Carolina's strong suits. On the flip side, number 2 in rushing defense in the league, allowing just 100 yards rushing per game. And that's something Carolina struggled at. So I wouldn't be surprised if this is a good old-fashioned fling fest from the Tar Heels in terms of trying to attack Clemson through the air. And that linebacker position is the strongest for them. Jeremiah Trotter Jr. leads the team in tackles with 71. Trenton Simpson, Carolina fans will remember him. Carolina was really, really hard after him. 2nd on the team at tackles, another linebacker for them. Both have 2.5 sacks on the year. So AJ, again, it's not a vintage Clemson. It's a good Clemson team. It's only lost 2 games on the year. So, I mean, and undefeated in conference play. So it's a really good team, but again, it's not the Clemson we've been used to seeing over the last kind of 10 years or so. Some of their better teams and some of their elite teams that have been, in the Final Four and competed and won national championships. It's not that team. So that is a positive for North Carolina. And looking at some of these stats on both sides of the ball, I know stats don't tell everything, but I think they do paint the picture here. there are some areas that Carolina will certainly be looking to exploit, and it'll be interesting to see if they can be successful exploiting them. But what are your kind of thoughts on the challenge ahead in terms of Clemson?
As you're rolling through some of those numbers, and I'm thinking about what are Carolina's strengths, what are their weaknesses, and how do you match them up? I think it's interesting that I think lately Carolina's strength defensively, if there is one, they've been better against the run.
Yeah.
And they've actually had good games against the run. So if that's Clemson's strength offensively, then I'm going to say it's strength versus strength, although Carolina's not real good against the run, but it's better against the run. I think the linebackers have been really good against the run. That's something that they both do very, very well. So then Carolina's strength offensively is throwing the ball, and that is a weakness at times for Clemson. We've seen that in a few games this year. So if Clemson's strength goes up against the best attribute on Carolina's defense, thing that it does, and Carolina's strength goes up against the worst thing that Clemson does defensively, I would think that the Tar Heels have a chance. Now, this isn't a vintage Clemson team, and you're saying that Carolina's catching them at a good time, but Clemson's catching Carolina at a real good time.
It's a good point too. Yeah,
the offense has had to have lost confidence the last couple of weeks. So, and they've lost 2 in a row. Both these teams are kind of limping into Charlotte, so they're the only truly meaningful championship either one of them are going to play for this year. So I think it's going to be a very physical game, very spirited game. And Clemson didn't get it last year. And Dabo is hell-bent on raising trophies and getting rings, things like that. Max got a nice ring collection too. So I think that Clemson will be ready. But Clemson has some issues. DJU is at times terrible. Yeah,
sure.
Drake's worst game is 202 yards passing with 1 INT. That's his worst game. Clemson fans would have taken 202 from DJU Saturday.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
They would have taken it. So Carolina has an advantage at quarterback. I don't know where else they have a serious advantage, but quarterback and then maybe those receivers against that secondary, but they have to be able to protect up front. How much does Clemson blitz? Does Clemson just sit back and drop 8? They might be wise to blitz because they got insane athletes that can cause some problems, and Drake can't beat you if he's running for his life, or can't beat you as much. Phil even said today that Drake told him that he's struggling a little bit with rolling to his left. He's having some issues right now with that. So if Clemson could get him to roll and try to throw that way against an extensive coverage, then that would be an obvious advantage for Clemson. This isn't a vintage Clemson team, but it's a good team, and I would imagine it's a team that's going to go in there on a mission to win a title. And they also will respect Carolina because Carolina's gotten a lot more attention than anybody in the league up until this past week. Now Florida State's getting attention, but Clemson's attention nationally has been negative. Carolina had positive attention because of Drake, and Mac's a good story, and everybody knows about him. And they were talking rebuild and coach of the year stuff. No one said anything like that about Clemson. So I think Clemson's going to be ready. Carolina's going to get their best shot. But eventually, if this game is 60-40 Clemson at the line of scrimmage, the question is, does Carolina have enough skill to offset that? And does the skill connect and perform? I think there's a chance that it does. I actually think Carolina can win this game. I'm not sure they're going to. I haven't made my prediction yet, but I do think they can. Josh Downs has been strangled the last 2 weeks. It's time for him to bust out. I can see Antoine Green getting open. They have other dudes that can catch the ball. The tight end element. You go ahead and blitz, dump to a tight end, especially if there's multiple tight ends on the field. I can see a path for the Tar Heels to win this game, Jacob. I really can, but they're going to have to do it throwing. They're going to have to do it throwing because they don't run it well. Clemson stops the run well. So it's going to have to be Drake. He's going to have to be in the 350 to 400 range minimum for them to win this game. Josh is going to have double-digit receptions. Antoine Green's going to have big chunk receptions. I could see it happening. It's probably not as likely as Clemson doing what it has to do, but it would not surprise me to see Carolina win the ACC championship.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me either. We'll get on to prediction in a second, but it wouldn't surprise me. I think if you would have asked me 3 weeks ago, especially with that after kind of Clemson lost that Notre Dame game soon around that time, especially the fashion they lost that game soon around that time, North Carolina winning the Coastal against Wake Forest, I would have been feeling a little bit differently. So we'll get into predictions right here. I'm going 34-24 Clemson. I just haven't seen enough out of North Carolina over the past couple of weeks in particular to really be confident as I could be going into this game. I think, again, I do agree. I tweeted this out. I think you're catching Clemson at a good time in some ways. And Clemson, like you said, is going to be saying the same thing about North Carolina. But I'm also a little hesitant, too, because of the way that Clemson lost to South Carolina. Is that really a positive thing? That could also backfire with Clemson being even more motivated and fired up going into that one. But you would think Carolina would be in the same boat, especially with the bad taste they have in their mouth right now. But again, I haven't seen enough. I think the biggest thing for me is it's just I haven't seen enough pass rush from North Carolina. I know that's not something Clemson's been super successful with throwing the ball, but again, Carolina's lost games in the past couple of weeks because they've got, in a lot of ways, dominated in the trenches. And when you're going up against an even more athletic, even better and more talented team than any team you faced over the past couple of weeks, that for me is where this game's going to be won, because that's where football's won, and that's where big boy football is won, especially. And again, I just haven't seen enough from North Carolina in the trenches over the past couple of weeks and really throughout the whole season to think they can go into Charlotte and stop Clemson for a prolonged period of time, but be able to protect Drake May enough, give him enough time to really have to go out there and do his thing. Because as we've seen, AJ, especially over the past couple of weeks, this team goes as Drake goes. And if Drake plays an average game, this team can lose to just about anybody. So I'm saying 34-24 Clemson. But again, like you said, if Carolina comes out and plays well and Clemson plays down to the level that I think they can, then I do think there is a chance Carolina can win this game. But just been a bad couple of weeks for North Carolina. It's tough to predict a win.
I'm going to do a point-counterpoint thing with what you said a couple of minutes ago. Clemson's secondary is susceptible. Drake can make those kinds of secondaries pay. DJU is more than capable of throwing the ball into some Carolina hands.
Yeah.
And then Clemson's had some special teams issues. Something could break there. Could Carolina have a special teams play that flips a field or even gets them points? I do think that those things are on the table. It's not like Carolina's going to play Georgia.
Yeah, I was about to say Georgia.
Nothing like that. They're not going to play Michigan. They're not even going to play TCU or Southern Cal or anything like that. They're going to play a team that's really good and has a lot of really good parts, but as a whole has flaws. Mm-hmm. And Carolina has some strengths that kind of fit right into those flaws and can take advantage of it. So I see a path. Those are the three things. Drake taking advantage of the secondary and the receivers. DJU chucking the ball to the Tar Heels a couple of times, and then something on special teams. That's the path for Carolina. I can see it happening right now. I haven't done my prediction. Until we started this podcast, I haven't even thought about it.
It is early.
Right now, I do think that it's hard to pick North Carolina to win the conference championship against Clemson right now, especially with what I've seen in the last 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. It's really hard to do that. Now, granted, I've seen every snap they've taken, they've had in person this year, and I haven't watched Clemson as closely. I'm sure Clemson people are saying, well, we can't see them winning a game, but I'm probably going to pick Clemson to win this game, but I absolutely believe there's a path for Carolina. And if they shed the last 2 weeks, and I asked Mac, is this a perfect opportunity? You got 12 in the books, regular season's done, no matter what happens from this point on. They were a 9-3 team. They were division champs. Now they're no longer, it's in a sense division championship, playing for something different. If they hit a reset and they just cleanse themselves of the last 2 weeks and go into this thing loose, then I absolutely think they have a chance to win. I'm probably going to pick Clemson in a fairly close game, but I think Carolina has a chance to. I think they'll be in the game with 10 minutes left in the fourth quarter. Yeah. So they have to make plays.
I do. Even with them, I picked them losing by 10. I still think it'll be a close game for most of it. I really do. I think it's going to be a good game, and I think it's going to be a tight win regardless. And again, hopefully Carolina can win, because I think it would be really good for the program and something also really fun to cover and interesting to cover and see, especially going into next year with that kind of being the year everybody's talking about. They can go in that on the back of an ACC championship, and then who knows what could happen in the Orange Bowl if you do it. Be a whole different narrative and a whole different vibe around the program going into next year. So, AJ, we'll see what happens. We'll be there on Saturday. Should be a fun matchup. Should be a fun game to cover. Yeah, I hope it is too. You would think it would be. Full. You would think it would be.
Yeah,
Or at least
I
pretty
would think so with these. I mean, both fan bases aren't too thrilled right now, but look, this is a great opportunity. So,
Yeah.
and it should be a cool game. They should just both wear one all blue and one all orange.
I would love that, man. I think that would be
and
absolutely
by the way,
fantastic.
Chuck the chrome helmets.
Yeah.
Out of here.
You know,
Chuck
not digging
helmets. They should have worn blue. I think State and Carolina should be all blue versus all red every
Agreed.
year, too. Did you see what Oregon State did? They wore.
No, what did they do?
Oregon State was in all black and black and their orange because that's their colors.
Mm-hmm.
Oregon was in all green.
I like that. That's how it should be, man. I've heard
this should be all orange. It should be all orange. And I think that they played in the ACC title game in 2015. I think Clemson wore their orange tops and Carolina wore their blue tops, but they had the white helmet, which I don't like that look.
Yeah.
Wear the blue helmet, wear the blue jersey.
I completely agree.
The blue pants.
That would be just beautiful for photo and video. Me thinking selfishly, just to be some great color contrast right there, man. And I'm always thinking about me. So I would absolutely love to see that. But it's going to be a good game under the lights. 8 p.m. kickoff, Bank of America Stadium. Again, that game will be on ABC. And make sure you keep it locked to TarHeelIllustrated.com for all your coverage leading up, during, and after the game as well. I've been Jacob Turner. He's been Andrew Jones. Yet another episode of the UNC Football Show. I guess we'll have one more coming, at least in terms of a preview show for Carolina's bowl game whenever we figure out when and where that's going to be. And again, a lot of that will be determined on who wins on Saturday in Charlotte. Make sure you guys like, share, subscribe, hit that notification bell as well so you know every time we upload, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks.